Hey, Mr. Lawson.
Hello.
Good to see you.
That's very, very good to see you. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a while, but actually only just over 2 years since we
Yeah, well, it
last
was
met in person, right?
December 2019. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It
yeah,
was
yeah.
the last night of the Devon tour.
It was the last night, yeah.
Was and that
Yeah,
because which was why it was kind of everything was really scattered because everybody was getting on different buses and going to different planes and yeah,
yeah,
I felt really lucky to get a little bit of time with you and Nathan at the end of the show. Because it was odd because it was one of those things where I knew half the band. So
uh-huh.
it was like whose guest list am I going to be on? It was, but and I got a very kind of quick say hello. I got a quick hello to Mike as well, but I didn't get to see Dev. And he and I, whenever he comes through Birmingham,
Mhm.
we get to meet up and hang. But yeah, it was a crazy night, but an extraordinary gig. I mean, what an amazing thing to have done. I don't know. It felt like a remarkable undertaking.
Yeah, I've told this story once or twice already, but you don't know about this. Like on the Devon tour, the Helsinki show, I had an out of body experience.
Wow.
Which meaning like it felt like as if I was watching the show from the outside while I
Mm.
was on stage playing, and it was incredibly remarkable. I don't know how to explain it even to people because it was really something special, and obviously
Yeah.
I did not leave my body, but it was that kind of experience. Like I'm actually experiencing this as somebody um, watching, listening from the outside,
That's
and yeah,
amazing.
it was an extraordinary tour.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just like seeing it, and on that scale, it felt like. I mean, it felt like it was the level of ambition that someone like Peter Gabriel would put into a tour, on the assumption that he was going to
Mhm.
sell 15,000 tickets a night, and
Mhm.
to do something on that scale, and be playing. I mean, they weren't small venues, but they were large club venues.
Mhm.
Was that again? I absolutely love Dev's ambition with those kind of things. It's like,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
can't. I think partly because I look at it from completely the opposite spectrum. That I've stripped away everything that is not the music. Like I don't I spend no time at all.
Yeah. You see, that's kind of like the approach of let's just call it us, right? That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's our kind of life, which means like we have to minimize everything. We have to go from, say, schlepping around like 40 kilos in the mid 90s to maybe now 4 5 kilos.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think this theme of kind of like like using technology and using the like
Mm.
really technology to kind of like make our lives easier and even make our profession possible for us.
Yeah,
um
absolutely. I mean,
that's something that I mean.
yeah, no, I was just going to say because I see old photos of me when I used to carry around like a 4U mixer rack, and I had it. I'd have a 14-channel Mackie desk on tour with me, like wired into the top of this rack, and two Lexicons and two Echoplexes and a Chaos pad, and then outboard pedals and stuff as well, and big amps, and it was just just a headache.
Yeah, I remember those days. I remember seeing you in Norwich in 2001, 2002, or
That's
whatever at that
exactly the
time.
rig I would have had at that point. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was craziness, and now it's like I can so I did my first bit of playing last week. My first bit of playing in front of people since the pandemic, so 2 years, and it was just a masterclass actually it's in the college I teach at, but I was kind of changing my hat and coming in as a guest rather than as a lecturer, and it was an improv workshop, and so I was suddenly conscious of the fact that I was going to play my music rather than just demonstrating how to play some technique or whatever to a bass student. So I took my performance rig here, which is this. There we go. That's it. So I have the Cuneo Mod Duo X, a preamp, a Chaos pad, a reverb pedal, and the K mix as the sort of mixer heart of it. And I took it on. I took that and my bass and the foot controllers on my bike and rode into work. Oh, my camera's all gone. wonky now. Let's straighten that. There we
Nice.
go. Yeah, and I took all of that into did the 4 or 5 mile journey on my bike, and it was like, wow. Has there ever been a time in my life when I could have got to a gig on my bike? Maybe not. And so I'm so grateful for those technological improvements that you're talking about, because they make whole other levels of well, so the one of the things that I've been thinking about with all this, because I think this plugs into the concept of what it is that makes it possible for us to do what we do, which I think you kind of touched on there, that there's changes in technology. That there's a whole load of stuff around that, and technology is one component of it, but culture is another, and kind of communication tools. The fact that you and I could, organize to tour together on even email, like we go back before that, and everything was phone calls and leaving messages with hotel concierges and trying to organize stuff, and so it just didn't happen. And that space of possibles, which is what Pierre Bourdieu would call it, all of the kind of things that culturally and socially and technologically, and in terms of the way that people's perception of what a music performance needs to be and the kind of space we need to be in to do it, all of those changes have made so many things possible that are just, it's kind of mind-blowing, and I feel incredibly privileged to get to explore the micro end of that. Like I remember when I was working so I had a few years where alongside music I was working in social technology and kind of doing a lot of consulting around kind of using social media for charities and government and all kinds of stuff. And one of the concepts that we used to have with that was the idea of MVP, minimum viable product. What was the smallest version of a thing that was actually worth doing? And I think one of the things that technology has made possible for us is that, as well as our rig being minimally viable now, the spaces that we can play in can shrink. The way that we can do things, the way we can extract value from that. So for me, being able to record it or stream it, I've done gigs where 4 people have shown up, and then you stream it, and so 400 people have seen it, and you go, well, great, well, that was worthwhile. So all of a sudden, it was worth playing to the 4 people, but economically that can be perilous. But suddenly having that enhanced audience and being able to go, the minimum viable version of this means I no longer need to sell 50, 100, 200 tickets in order to make it possible. That again is kind of, and that has a spillover into the kind of music that we get to make, because we're no longer thinking I need to write music that 200 people want to listen to in a room. And I think that expanding of the space of possibles is a really, really exciting thing.
Exactly, and I mean that's one of the major things I wanted to talk to you about, is like this. Like on the surface, it may look like things have gotten more and more challenging for musicians, for artists, right? But at the same time, like things have never been as available, and the tools have never been available before, to really kind of, as you say, to really do what we do. As you say, like we don't need to think in terms of numbers anymore so much.
No, and I think the thing that's got harder is to emulate the model of the sort of pre-internet age. And so there are people who see, because so much of this is about what we perceive success to be. And if we think that success requires us to be our audience to be ever consistently getting bigger, to play to, I remember when I first started out, that I thought strangers were more important than people I knew. That when I got to play to people I didn't know, it felt like a real audience. And if I knew them, it was like, oh, well, these are just my mates showing up. And then I realized that actually the audience was a chance to meet people, and that my audience were generally more interesting than me. So I suddenly was like, well, actually, rather than getting obsessed with playing to strangers, it was like, well, I want to make sure that those strangers become part of a community. So, and again, that flies in the face of all of the nostalgia that I grew up with. This idea that what I was trying to do was to go around the world and have I did in 1999. I did a tour playing bass for Howard Jones, which was kind of the biggest sort of tour bus thing. And even that wasn't massive. It was just a band on a single bus. And I did that. And that felt like such an achievement at the age of 26 to be out on a tour bus with one of my childhood heroes. And I think if I'd hung on to that and believed that that was what I needed to replicate in my solo career, the music would have been different. The context would have been different. I'd have had to start engaging record labels and publicists and all that kind of stuff. And I would have probably ended up massively in debt miserable and not making all that much music. Because one of the things that I realized early on was that my own creative curiosity was going to result in far more music than a record label would ever let me release. And there were, I think, the community that you and I were a part of at that time, the sort of extended community that kind of built up around, particularly, I think Burning Sheds was kind of quite a key player in this, and the way that they started doing the CDR kind of releases. They had that sort of that almost like a sort of supermarket value line way of doing music, where it was like, well, okay, the covers are all just got a sticker on a brown label, so there was an aesthetic to it, but it was one that was kind of guerrilla on purpose. And I think that suddenly realizing that we could do that and actually make that part of the meaning and the story of what we were doing, instead of pursuing this kind of 1980s version of bigness, that sort of modernist trajectory, that it was like your band has to be bigger and bigger and bigger. I was talking recently to the singer from an indie band from the 90s called Ned's Atomic Dustbin, who I was a big fan of as a kid, partly because they had two bass players. But he was telling me that when they sold, I don't know how many records in the UK, 60,000, 80,000, something like that, of an album, got signed in the US, went to America, sold 500,000 records, and were considered a failure. Because the expectation was you have to be this big. If you're not, and I think their label thought they were going to be the sort of indie guitar version of Bush or something. I don't know what it was. They kind of, but they had projected onto them a number. And because they didn't meet that number, they were seen as failures. And it's like, and looking back now, I think that I got really lucky to become a part of that extended community of people who were pursuing things in a different way. And it's funny because I think as a scene, I only see it kind of in retrospect. I didn't necessarily feel I was part of a scene at the time. And yet there were people I was absorbing ideas from. And there were people that musically as well as kind of functionally. But all of our kind of orbits were overlapping, and there were gigs that were opening up, because I remember doing a show with Pete Chilvers, and it was organised by a guy who'd heard me on Lake Junction, and I can't remember if he tried to book Pete or tried to book me, and then one of us recommended the other one, and we ended up doing this gig somewhere outside Cambridge together. And it was just like these kind of different worlds that overlapped. And I think for me at the time, especially, I was trying not to get too lost in bass world. I didn't want to play to rooms full of bass players. It wasn't that I minded bass players enjoying what I did, but there's a very distinct set of expectations that come with that. And so back to the thing about the space of possibles and kind of what the affordances are for a certain kind of playing, when your entire room are sat watching with a notepad, writing down the techniques you use and the time signatures. that there is, you're setting them up for disappointment by trying to do something else. And so connecting with that community, and the night that we played in Norwich, which was the night after, it was the night after the last night of the tour I'd opened for Level 42. So the juxtaposition between those two, between playing those big venues and getting to the end of this tour and going, wow, I could do that once a year and actually kind of almost live on that. Like I didn't, and especially once the PRS royalties came in later on for my share of the kind of ticket royalty, there was a lot of money in that 1 month of touring. And yet creatively, it squashed me into this tiny box where I suddenly had a set list and was playing the same 6 tunes, and the intros were the same. And it was because in order to connect with 1,000, 1,500 people or whatever, I mean, because there were bigger venues than that, but most of the people were at the bar, because who gives a shit about the support act? But playing to that kind of audience brought with it all of these constraints. And then suddenly there we are in Norwich, and it's this crazy kind of rolling set list where everybody's set is overlapping with everybody else, and we all get to play mad shit. And it's where I met Theo Travis, who I then ended up working with a lot. And I think mine overlapped with, at one end, Theo, and at the other end, Roger Eno. And, and kind of getting to see all these people and meet people. And it was like, suddenly I'd gone from a space of huge economic opportunity, but really narrow creative limitations, to one that economically made absolutely no sense at all. I mean, the idea that the 15 or 20 people, however many people were playing that night, the idea that we could have actually made any money out of that nobody thought of that. That's not why we were doing it. And yet the creative possibilities and the things that came out of that and the friendships and all that kind of stuff that came out of that was just enormous. And it was, and so as a really stark comparison of the world that is offered to us, the kind of, oh, if you play the game right, then you can go and do this, and you can play at the Albert Hall, and you can play at the Liverpool Philharmonic, and you can open for bands that were famous when you were a kid. Or you can do this, and you can find a way to make it sustainable. And in the process, get to play music with like-minded, curious, strange people.
If we want to analyze that in hindsight, and really the question we should ask, what is really the difference between playing the level 42 opening act versus playing that house in Norwich that I can't remember the name of, and I think, and you're a specialist for that, I know, so that's why I'm mentioning this. It is. I think in the end, it's about the communication and like how you actually use the opportunities that each situation gives you. So what I mean by that is that even in the context of the level 42 shows, there would have been, let's say, opportunities to connect with people.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm sure you did, right?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's where again, because I'm in PhD brain at the moment, the theoretical framework for that is Gibson's theory of affordances. That there are things that are presented to you as opportunities that are kind of built into the design of the setting that you're in. And so with level 42, it was looking at it and going, well, where is my point of connection with this audience? I go, well, that's at the merch table. Not because I had to sell people stuff to make it worthwhile. I mean, it was great that I did, but I could have done without. I didn't. It wasn't that I needed to go down there and hustle. It was that was a place where there was a model for communication between support act and audience that wasn't weird. That people weren't going to jump on me if I kind of just went and sat in the audience. People would have kind of been a bit shy to come and talk to me. Or if I'd been stood outside having a cigarette, I don't smoke, so that would have been particularly weird. But if I'd been outside, then there were these sort of transactional spaces where you kind of. And I still have subscribers now on Bandcamp. We'll get into that later on, I guess. But I still have people who are part of my core audience whose first exposure to what I did was the Level 42 tool. So, and it wasn't like I wrote a separate bunch of music to play it. It was that I had to frame what I was doing, my kind of creative pursuits in this quite. I mean, and it's not even like it's a bad thing. It's not like I think that playing tunes the same way night after night is morally abhorrent. It's not like I go like, I was a failure. It's not, I didn't feel like I was prostituting myself. It's just that my curiosity as a musician has always been about the potential for improvisation to bring the unexpected into a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's where I'm at now, where I never play. I've done 4 gigs in 10 years with a set list, and none of them were my own shows. Where it's just a matter of you get up on stage and you play what feels right for the moment, but you revisit vocabulary. It's not like you change, a completely different musical world every night. But the opportunity is there to draw on whatever it is that feels like the right thing for that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so sorry.
Yeah, I think the how shall I say, is the medium with which you're making the connection with people.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be the music. Like,
No.
in some cases, I think it's actually, and there are also psychological concepts for this. Like doing something that's unexpected will actually put you in touch with the people that need to experience you, and where you need to experience them.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's always, like there's some with touring with Stickman, for example. Like I love that gig, and I really love that, and it's a real privilege to be paid for playing, right? So that's one thing. But but without actually meeting people after the shows, I wouldn't really be happy.
No.
So you see, like there's the music we play, and that's great, and it's wonderful that we can do what we do. But the social aspect, meeting the audience, that's what makes the difference for, as you were saying, people that may sign up as subscribers of Bandcamp, for example. Right?
But it also, and I think for me, and this is something that I've kind of, again, this is why I'm doing the PhD, is that I got to the point where that was also that reflection back of the experience of what I was trying to do through the audience was how I understood what I was trying to do. And so the audience, the significance of the audience has got greater and greater over the years. And I've spent the best part of 20 years curating spaces where my audience could gather and understand each other as much as me. And it wasn't about seeing them as a resource to be exploited, more about generating a community space in which the conversation about the music and about other things could illuminate what it was that we were all trying to do with this stuff. So at the heart of it is the music that I make, the shows, the recordings, whatever it is. But actually, by presenting that to them, it's as much about me learning from their response to it as it is about me trying to sell them the stuff. And I think that as an evolving kind of set of possibilities, the affordances for that, with kind of different tools emerged online. But also, again, it's back to the thing about the assumptions around what you do, because it's not a thing that scales well. Like, I couldn't do it, but I don't think I could. I don't think I would be able to understand my audience if there were 5,000 of them. That if I had 5,000 Bandcamp subscribers, the volume of input that I would get and the degree of impetus for them to speak into that community in order to connect with 5,000 people would mess up the kind of the sort of very conversational, chatty nature of the way that things go on. Because I think one of the this is again, I suppose, a specific example, but it might illuminate what's going on here. One of the things that I really like about my communication with the subscriber audience, particularly, is the fact that if I say something that's boring, they'll ignore it. So if I don't get knee-jerk reactions from people who just want to connect with me. And funny, we were talking about Dev earlier on, because one of the things that sparked this thought in my head was the way that Devin can post a picture of any old shit on his Instagram. A view of a monkey's balls or a dog turd or just kind of any absurd nonsense. And he'll get a bunch of people going, "I love you, man. When do you come to such and such a place?" There's this bunch of responses, none of which he's got time to read, none of which are kind of, would be valuable use of his time. But there's this desperation to connect that would make it very difficult for him to be able to filter that into what's meaningful and what isn't. At that scale, you don't get to have that conversation with your audience because there's this sort of inbuilt separation, because they idolize you on a level. And I think that brings with it a set of opportunities and a set of things you can do, that because of the scale at which you can work and the economics of that. But for me, I was like, I've always thought that actually having an audience that functioned more like a community and less like me on a pedestal and them kind of sort of, I didn't need that separation that is at the heart of fame. What I wanted was a space in which I could actually talk to them about what I was doing and get honest responses. But also the other thing that I've creates a tension in there is that when people start to feel familiar with you, they can, and I had this back kind of when I started out, they start trying to tell you what they think you should do. And they'll go, "You know what you should do, Steve? You should do a record with a drummer." And I'd be like, "Really? Because do you honestly think there's a lack of records with bass and drums on them? Is that a thing that you're missing in your life? Really?" I'm hearing quite a lot of those around at the moment. I'm not hearing quite as much of what I'm doing. So maybe I'll just stick with this. And people would have their idea of what you should do. And what I realized the perfect answer to that was over the years was to say, they go, "You know what you should do? You should do a record with a drummer." And I go, no, you should. Because it's you that wants to hear it. Like, if you want to hire me to make that record, then fine. I'll come and record for you if you want to pay me. But it's clearly your vision that has produced that as a desire, not mine. This music didn't happen by accident. There's a method in my madness and kind of how I ended up here. So how about you let me get on with that? And you can talk to me about what it means to you. And I don't mind you wanting to hear what I would sound like with a drummer. I don't think that's a bad thing. But when you dump that on me as being, this is what you should do, then we've got a problem. And one of the interesting things about the way that the subscriber thing is set up is that nobody within that community has ever said to me, "Here's what you should do."
There's a funny story about there's a funny story about like somebody telling me what I should do at some point after a show. this lady came and said, Marcus, you should write a musical about the Van Stuben Turnpike, which was somewhere in Pennsylvania. You know, my response was, because I didn't know what I just said, I should.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the best you should. My favorite one, and the only one I might ever do, is I was in a conversation on Facebook once, and I'm having to mention that I'd never heard Bowie's Berlin Trilogy. That I know the singles off it, but my interest in David Bowie starts at Tin Machine. Like I'm kind of the early stuff is like it's fine, you know, it's whatever, but it sits in a place in culture that I'm not interested in exploring. So I said I hadn't heard it, and so there's another friend of mine in the States who I met because his name is Steve Lawson as well. So we're only friends because we used to have to forward each other our email. Like I get email for him, but we ended up being really good friends. And he said, "You know what you should do? You should do your tributes to it, your version of it, without ever listening to it. So just go and re-record David Bowie's Berlin Trilogy based on what you imagine it should sound like." Which is such a great idea.
It's a great idea.
So at some point, you may well see 3 records from me called Low and Berlin and whatever the other one was called. Yeah, so that might happen at some point. But but it was also another kind of indication of how you know things, just these absurd things. You know, because that guy, that was the other Steve Lawson, has become a really good friend, and he's somebody he's a subscriber on Bandcamp. But when we used to, he's left Facebook now, but when we used to have conversations on there, it would really confuse people because it looked like I was talking to myself. Because it would just be Steve Lawson replying to Steve Lawson all the way down this page. They'd be like, wait, what? You usually keep changing your avatar to try and make this look like it's a conversation. But yeah, that sort of thing just that really tickles me. I like that.
Let me ask you a question about something you said a few minutes ago. So you say that the scale, basically, the number of people that you address, or that addresses you, changes what exactly? The opportunity for communication, the kind of message that can go back and forth. I would say, like when you were saying that, like, you know, the pedestal thing, I think the pedestal thing only ever worked because there was somebody in between. There was some sort of,
it was mediated, absolutely.
It was mediated, and since the mediators are not interested, and for a reason, in artists that don't make enough money so that a cut would actually make you richer.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there's something else when you talk about this, because it happened with crowdfunding platforms.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that's the reason why we are facing this situation we're in right now. And like, tell me more about this. What do you think? What is like the what would be the number, say, of people as subscribers on Bandcamp where it would become difficult? You said 5,000, but
no, it's a lot lower than that. I think because I think a lot is to do with the degree of engagement, and I think that if we go back to Kevin Kelly's 1,000 fans thing, which I guess was the first time somebody put a number on what the minimum viable audience was, and he said 1,000 fans. But actually, there's a gradient because I don't think anybody has 1,000 fans and a hard wall around those 1,000 fans, and that what you have is a gradient of intensity. So you have a couple of people who are happy to give you loads of money and travel long distances to see you and buy everything you put out in the center. This is the normal model, and then it goes right out to people who listen to you on a streaming platform and make pennies for you a year. But again, if there's enough of them, that becomes a part of your income. So it's not that there's 1,000 people; it's that there's actually 20,000 people, of whom 200 really care about what you're doing, and it kind of trickles down from there. So within a subscriber community, you also have that. You have people who are, I mean, I'm pretty sure I have subscribers who spend almost no time listening to me at all. That actually what they're there for is a commitment to the model and a general kind of a positive disposition towards me as a person. And so they're happy to support me being able to do what I do without feeling the need to listen to absolutely ridiculous amounts of my music, because the volume of music that's available there is now, you know, it's usefully kind of at the point where nobody can know it all. I don't know. I occasionally things will come on and I'll go, wait, what was that? And I'd be trying to remember what record it was from, and I have no idea. And it's like, was that me? Have I released this? Do I know what it? And I
Yeah,
just
I know
because
exactly what you
there's
say.
because I think this is particularly interesting talking to you about this because you're one of the few people around who is as prolific as I am as a recording artist, and I think we can maybe talk about that, about the aesthetics of the sort of no demo culture, the idea that everything is made to be listened to. I think that's a really interesting aspect of this. But yeah, so there's like 117 albums or something that are out there, and there are 80 or 90 that you get the moment you sign up to the subscriber thing now. I don't even know, I've lost count. And so there were a bunch of people I think who listen to almost none of it. There are others who really like the early stuff. They're sort of, the sort of classic, I like his early work before he sold out crowd, who are still committed to it, and that actually the paying annually is gestural. It's a gesture of goodwill towards me that they are still interested in what I'm doing, even though they aren't, they're not that interested in when the next record is coming out. And then there's a sort of a sliding scale up to people who the week after I've put out a new recording are like, that was great, when's the next one? And are genuinely waiting to see what I do. And within that, there are different tiers of relationship as well. There are people in there who have become really good friends. There are people in there who are actively supportive of the kind of the structures around my career. They've helped me organize gigs. They will, actively go out and try and recruit other people to the cause. There are people who respond to that. And then there are those whose interaction with it is that they want to review it and give me the feedback. And particularly when I request it, when I go, okay, you've had a couple of weeks to listen to the new recording, anybody got any thoughts on it? They'll come in with very thoughtful readings of what's going on in it. And so obviously I could put together a value matrix of where all that stuff sits, but I think there's a point at which the scale of it could start to interfere, because I think I often think about scale as being like the way that in physics bodies of a certain size have a certain gravitational pull, and a huge planet has a far stronger gravitational pull than a small one. And the bigger you get, the more gravity there is that's starting to interfere with the things that move into its orbit. And I think that as a bigger, that for me at the moment, I'm functioning on a level where I have very little pull with my audience. That the impetus to investigate it is mostly theirs. It's not that they have anything socially to gain by associating themselves with me. It's not like, oh, I'm a Steve Lawson fan, and they go, oh, people, oh wow, you're amazing. I would like to sleep with you. It doesn't have that kind of cachet. Sadly, it would be fun to be in that position. But there isn't really a kind of social impetus beyond the kind of being included in this community, which is very flattened in terms of its hierarchy. And so even down to the things like the fact that I don't have a second tier for it, like it's £30 a year and you're in and you get everything. There's no version where I do vinyl or CDs or exclusive extra gigs or increased access, because I don't want it to feel like A, I'm rewarding rich people with better options, or B, like this community isn't enough. The representation of enoughness within it, of going, actually, this is the ticket through the door, but once you're in, we're all just going to talk about it. We've all got all the music, and you can engage with it on whatever level you want. There are no assumptions about what you need to do with this. And if you want to take the new album and listen to it 50 times, that's great. If you want to listen to some old stuff that you liked when you were 12, then that's also cool. If you want to talk to me about it, you can. If you want to ignore that side of things, that's also cool. I kind of want it to be a space where people's decision to engage with it is actually part of how I understand what it means to them. Because there's this constant kind of loop of it's reception theory is kind of, again, back to the PhD thing. There was a theorist called Stuart Hall who looked at this in the context of mass media, and about how production in TV was a cycle, because they would make a show, broadcast a show, incorporate the public's response to it to make the next show, and that there was this cycle, and yet that was very much kind of instrumentalized, and it was about making the audience happy. That your job is to engage a certain number of people in order to justify your space on screen. And because I own the space that it's operating in, there's nobody else that I need to make happy. So actually, the degree to which I understand what I do with my understanding that I get from the audience is not, I need to do more of this in order to get more people, or I need to do more of this because then they'll love me more. It's, oh, okay, so that kind of stuff connects and that doesn't. Maybe I need to explain that better because I want to do that, but I want to make sure that they understand it. So, for example, another useful example, when I started using the Cuneo, is it on? There we go. Yeah, when I started playing percussion on the Cuneo, and I play drums like, as Questlove describes it, like a drunk toddler. I mean, he's not describing me. He was talking about that particular kind of sloppy neo soul drumming. I don't think Questlove has any opinions on my drumming, much as I would love to think so. But because I play like that, and a lot of my audience come from a very pristine kind of prog and electronica background, they're used to the aesthetics of conspicuous musicianship, which I think is there is a lot of that in my solo stuff. There are moments of that where you can go, I'm listening to a guy be really clever with a bass. And when I start playing drums, there's none of that. It's a completely non-virtuosic engagement with rhythm. And so I then felt this huge burden of how to communicate that intention. How do I make it clear that this isn't that I'm bad at drums, it's that this is how I want the drums to sound. Mm-hmm. And the subscriber community afforded me space to explore that in a way that I never could have done if it was a purely public release. I would have put it out and then kind of hidden in my hands while a torrent of abuse came from bass players going, "You can't even play. That's rubbish. What are you doing? You don't even know what you're doing." Whereas in the other setting, I had people who listened to me for 15 years at the time that I started doing it, emailing me and saying, "Man, this is beautiful music, but the drums sound really off. What's going on?" And they weren't like going, "I'm going to stop." There was no threat to stop listening to me. They'd already paid for the music. So there wasn't any, they weren't holding me hostage and going, "I'm not buying this until I understand it. I'm not buying this until I like it. You need to change this so I'll buy the next thing." These are people who've already committed to being financially supportive of what I do, which totally changes that relationship. It's not one where they have a power over me. I mean, they can choose to unsubscribe at a certain point, and I'm okay with that. There's lots of good reasons why people would unsubscribe. Not least of all, I've got enough of your music. Thanks very much. That's a perfectly good reason for somebody to stop. But what's lovely about it is when they come to me and say, "I genuinely don't understand where this is coming from." They're doing it not to make me feel bad about it, but to say, "Can you explain it?" And the assumption that I'm going to be willing to do that is a reasonable one for them in a way that it wouldn't have been for me as a kid. If I'd heard, if when Wish came out by The Cure, I'd gone, "This doesn't sound like Disintegration. I need to phone Robert up and have a word with him about what's going on." Like, the Friday I'm in Love is a bit too pop, and I want to know why you don't still sound like Fascination Street. Like, that's
I love that record.
It's an amazing record, isn't it? It's just beautiful. But like, changes in style, or when if you, even at a smaller scale, if you think when Paradise Lost went from being a death metal band to being a kind of heavy Depeche Mode kind of sounding electronica band, that was a huge schism, and the only people talking about that and trying to make sense of it were journalists in between. So they got to do maybe 4 big interviews. They probably did Kerrang, Metal Hammer, maybe Sounds if it was still around when they did that. There was like the amount of large scale press they could have generated for that was a small number of interviews in which there was no right to reply from what the audience would have made of that. So they got to declare a set of intentions. They could write a manifesto and then try and present that through interviews, but they didn't get to actually go to the audience and go, "How are you doing with this?" Maybe at the merch table, again, we're back to, that as this sort of amazing point of transaction between artists and audiences. But they didn't get to have that conversation. And so I think about, the degree of freedom that you and I have to do that and to present to our audience, kind of new ways of doing what we do and saying to them, "It's okay if you don't get it. There'll be more stuff along that you like in a minute, but indulge me. Let me experiment with this." That back to, I think the way you described it earlier on about the fact that we look at things as being there's a hardship in making music, and you go, yeah, but there's also an affordance for totally different ways of thinking about what it is to be an artist, and we're not stuck in that funnel, in that, because if you think about the things that were seen as radical when we were young, the kind of tiny changes that bands would make, and then they would, and they would be in interviews going, oh well, we feel like we've made quite major changes to what we do. I remember reading an interview with a couple of the members of Cannibal Corpse, who are, lovely guys, good friends. I really like the music, but I remember they put out a record a few years ago where they were saying, we've really kind of gone out there. And we're including a lot more kind of thrashy elements in here. And I was like, I'm a fan, and really, I can't hear much of a change here at all. This sounds like a really great Cannibal Corpse record. But they're listening to kick patterns and going, well, yeah, but that's a real kind of Slayer kick pattern. That's not what you would happen on a death metal record. And these riffs are much more tonal than they are, And I'm going, fine. They're feeling like they need to explain moving 2% in either direction.
And artists have a completely different resolution to what they do.
Yeah.
A slight change may appear like something major, but I agree.
And interesting that I felt that as well. I felt like when I added in kind of piano and drums using the Cuneo, because I'd been solo bass Steve for so long, that I thought that there was going to be a pushback just in terms of me doing that, and it wasn't. The reaction to it was about the aesthetics of the music, and about that kind of a handful of people going, I don't really get the drums. I've still got a couple of guys who have been listeners to what I do for 20 years, who are still like, you know what, I still feel like I'm tolerating the drums. Every now and again, there'll be something that I really like, but at the moment, it's still not my bag. But none of them have ever said, you need to stop doing it. In fact, at least two of them have said. The
funny thing is that I still remember hearing one of your albums that had the drums on it, and I was surprised as well.
Yeah, it was.
But like the way that I, the way that it sounded to me was like part of the texture. Like that's how I felt it, right? It was, it never kind of tried to be anything in particular, if you know what I mean. Like it was just music, right?
Yeah, and that was the thing. When I brought it in, it wasn't like, now I need to do rock stuff. I'm bringing drums in because I want to get heavier, or I'm bringing drums in because I want it to be this. It allowed me to use elements of hip hop in particular, which is a big love of mine, but also one that, as a kind of middle class white English guy, I'm aware of the semiotics of drawing on hip hop, and so it gets mangled in with everything else. And like you say, it becomes part of that texture. And when I first started doing it, it's really interesting that I got the Cuneo in sometime in mid 2015, and I did a tour at the end of 2015 with Jonas Hellborg, and who's an extraordinary thinker. I have an awful lot of time for Jonas. Complicated character, but an amazing thinker about music. And he said after one of the gigs, he said, I don't know why you're using such normal sounds when your bass sound is so mystical. And it was such, I don't know, such. You described the sounds as obvious, I think was what he said about the song. And I was using a kind of fairly straight up piano sound and unprocessed drums at the time. And it was really useful, again, to like get that level of feedback and to then go, hang on a minute, I need to give as much attention to this stuff as I do to the bass sound. I can't get away with this just being like a kind of MIDI add-on to what I'm doing. I need to actually think about what these sounds bring in, the same way that I would sit and play with a reverb setting for an hour. I need to do the same with the snare sound, and I need to do the same with the kind of the sound stage that the drums sit within, and the piano needs to be, if it's going to be a piano, it needs to be a piano that is chosen because it's the best possible piano sound, not just because it's the sample that's present in whatever software I'm using. And that intervention was a hugely significant one. I'll turn on my gear and occasionally I'll just have this moment of being grateful to Jonas for his input in there, because it's a thing that I've recognized in a lot of other music made by bass players in particular, is that often the bass sound is amazing and everything else is crap. And the assumption is, you only want to hear the bass anyway. Like, you get these really crappy MIDI piano sounds and like poorly recorded drums in somebody's bedroom. And then this bass that sounds like the voice of God in the middle of it. And you're like, really? Was that a good production decision? I think you've put your energies where they weren't really needed. And I don't ever want to do that. And I think there's a couple of maybe I'll remix them at some point, but there's a couple of the early things I did with the drums and keys that definitely have that schism. They have the kind of
Mhm.
very naturalistic but actually quite obvious drum sound, and then
Mhm.
this mystical bass sound. I think that's a lovely term. I love the idea of being mystical.
Mhm.
But yeah, and so that the aesthetics of that evolved over time. But aside from Jonas's intervention, the audience response, and particularly the subscriber community, because all of that happened around the same time, that the first subscriber release, I think, was the first thing I ever put Cuneo on. I think I put out an album called Closing In, which was a subscriber only record before the first album that I did that had all of that nonsense on it. And that was the first time I ever used it. There's a track at the end of it, and it has this kind of it's almost like a kind of broken glass effect that I got out of, I can't remember what it was in, Ableton maybe.
Mhm.
Really lovely kind of icy keyboard patch that I used on a thing, and that's on there, and that's the first time I'd ever used it recording wise. And again, I was able to sort of gauge the response from a community. And I think then this is another kind of key thing, and I'd be interested to know the degree to which you feel this. That it felt like a community that actually cared about what I was doing. It didn't feel like I was throwing it into a hostile commercial space where it was going to be judged based on how many copies it sold. Like people were going to punish me by choosing not to buy it and not to listen to it. Instead, I was putting it into a community that already paid for it to exist and already gave a shit about what I was doing. And so I could put it in there knowing that if they didn't like it, they weren't going to hate me for it. And that we could have that ongoing conversation about the context within which it existed and why I'd made those decisions. And crucially, that they would defer judgment until that conversation had taken place. So they weren't going to dismiss the work until they'd come back with a bunch of questions, because there was this thing. And this is another one of the lovely things that has kind of come in through the PhD. A phrase from a friend of mine in the States, where he talks about expanding the space of the talk aboutable, which is a
Mhm.
lovely phrase, the space of the talk aboutable.
Mhm.
And so because I'm
Mhm.
releasing music into the space of the talk aboutable, the work expands to include the conversation, so that the work is understood not just through the lens of listening, but through the lens of discussion and cognition and framing and all that other stuff. So do you feel like your community cares about you? Do you experience that?
I think it's about the expectation, as we were saying, about the expectation of your audience, right? So if the audience sees you as primarily somebody who is experiments with music or with sounds,
Yeah,
then there are no grounds to well, you could say, okay, I don't like that sound. That's one way of judging what you do, right? Just say I
mm.
don't like that sound, or like what Jonas was saying. But that does not mean that you're not successful in your experimentation. And actually, the feedback, if somebody says, I don't like that sound, that is what you sort of want to elicit with your experiment, right? You kind of
Yeah,
want that feedback. You need that feedback because maybe this is, well, it's maybe true for you as well. Like, I don't see myself as the guy who knows everything, right? Like,
yeah,
no,
no, absolutely not.
I'm part of a community, and as you say, like the Bandcamp community, like the
Mm.
subscribers, for example, you kind of like can count of them to be part of your organism.
Mm.
That's how I kind of like see it, right? So and I think we should always at least be open to keep experimenting.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I think what I like about that is it's a really interesting contrast with the definition of experimental music that Derek Bailey uses. Because Derek used to talk about, he would say there's no such thing as experimental music because the experimenting has already happened before you perform. That actually the performance
Hmm.
itself is a manifestation of something that has already been experimented and you're just playing. And whereas I think actually what you're describing is an experiment in the sense that everything we do is an iteration along a journey rather than about a finished product.
The process,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. So that all the what you and I are doing is documenting a process, and there are all
Yeah.
these landmarks along that process, and that there is the invitation to the audience to engage with that as a body of work, or to insert themselves anywhere in it and go, oh, I like that one, so they can commodify it, they can turn it back into a product rather than an episode, and go, well, actually, I want to listen to that album a lot. I really like that record you did in 2015, and that's the one I'm going to dig into. Or they can treat it as a longer narrative arc and go, actually, I really love the way that Marcus's music developed from those early records to what he's doing now. I like what happened when he joined the Stickmen, and suddenly, there was that Crimson vocabulary became much more apparent in his playing, or whatever. That they learn about your story through the documentation of it as recordings. And I think that for me, that the idea that every album is a chapter, that actually seeing the release mechanism as more podcast-like than like a kind of traditional album release model has been absolutely essential to me, being able to kind of do that, and with each album to talk about to that audience, to be able to talk to them about how and why it exists, and even why I chose to release it. Because I think, again, once you're in a state where there is an abundance of music, everything exists not because I need to release a record this month, but because this deserves to be released. And that again changes the listener experience. Because if I put out an album once a year, then that album might exist because I needed to put an album out. If I put out 12 albums a year to an audience that I've promised 3 albums to, then those other 9 records exist because I felt that they were absolutely worthwhile. And that there is an assumption from the audience that this stuff is worth engaging with, because who the hell wants to put out 9 albums of bullshit around 3 great albums when you could just put 3 great albums out and everybody will be happy with that? Like there's literally no impetus for me to release bad music at all because of that frame. That by pursuing a model where what I'm actually trying to foster in the audience, the one bit of manipulation in this is I want them to be in a space where they get to be grateful for the music rather than to feel like a transaction has taken place where they've paid a unit cost for it. That when they give me £30 a year, I want the amount of music they get to be something they go, wow, this is great, thank you. That's really kind of you. And I don't want them to pay. I don't want them to feel obliged to pay more for it. It's not about the fact that I kind of expect them to give me extra. Although the lovely thing is that, again, because of Bandcamp's, X amount or more model, there are people who go, actually, I get more out of this and I want to express that financially. That's fantastic. And, that has a significant impact on my annual kind of, my ability to pay rent. but it's not implicit or explicit within the work. The idea that I make more than the kind of baseline offering is about saying, you've made this possible. The community at large makes the as a financial framework, as a relational framework, as a space of possibles in which to experiment. This community has made it possible for me to make this amount of work, and part of the gratitude, my expression of gratitude is to release it, and their response is to then go, wow, this is great. Where does all this come from? And I occasionally do get people going, but how do you maintain that level of consistency? And it's like, and which is a beautiful question to be asked, to be told, to be asked, how are you that good? Like that's a really, really lovely thing.
What is your answer? What is your answer to that question?
The freedom affords me, the creative freedom that the community affords me means that I'm not trying to second guess what an audience would want, which is where most people's mistakes come from. Most people who make bad music do it because they assume that somebody will like that bad music, not because they do. Very few people who make music for themselves make bad music. They might make music I don't like, but because they have a fixed and constantly referable benchmark for what it is they're trying to do, which is their own taste, that ends up hopefully that it's possible to kind of meet that and to go, yeah, I really like this. And years down the line you might appraise it differently, but that's okay. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I find that because I have that community, because I get to do the things that I care about, and I make the records that I want to have exist in the world. I don't know if you saw yesterday, I put up a quote from Chris Morris, the British kind of filmmaker and TV maker, and he just said, I see an awful lot of work that doesn't need to exist. And he said, if it doesn't need to be there, I won't make it. Something like that. And I was like, I mean, and a couple of people in the comments started unpacking the concept of need, and I was like, yeah, the need might be your own, but I get to make the music I make is music that doesn't exist in the world, but I think should. That's basically the gist of it. It's like what is it that doesn't currently exist that I think would be a good thing to have in existence? And I spend quite a lot of time listening to my own music because, again, I think I'm very interested to know how this works for you. As an improviser who is constantly refining my signal chain so that I can automate, so that the release process is a matter of taking a recording and just going, okay, I can just compress it slightly and EQ it in order to kind of meet the sonic expectations of a listening audience. But it takes me 20 minutes to master an album, and I can put it out. The where was I going with that? I had a really solid point, and it's vanished. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the needs to exist. Yeah. So I can make a thing and then listen to it and just and decide pretty much immediately whether I think it has value and purpose within the community, and then I'll just put it out. And I quite often write a thing about it. Music is often accompanied by an essay. Through the pandemic, the music was responses to very specific things that were going on. But sometimes I would need calming music because the news of the day was ridiculous, and I would try and kind of make something kind of calming. And then other times it would be like, I sort of need to. I don't have words for this unease that's going on, but I'm going to turn it into music that feels like that. And the response again was sometimes from people going, actually, I am already feeling really uneasy, so I didn't really need that. Thanks, you've made me feel worse. And other times it was people going, nothing else has expressed how I feel as well as this music did. Which is, what a gift that is from an audience to say, thank you for putting into music the things that none of us can put into words. So there is that
those words I'm hearing quite a bit, like that there's something about what I do that gives people some sort of, and I don't really know which word to use, comfort, which is kind of like a strange word to use, I find, because the connotations can be also negative, right? Somehow.
Yeah.
But I find that there is like just something that is in the air, or that can be in the air, and if I allow myself to act as the antenna, it will it will just come out. And I have to say, like, I had some sad days where I felt like where I had time to record, where I felt like I would like to, and I where I knew I would really play something outstanding today.
Yeah.
But then I didn't do it. I didn't do it because I felt like, oh, it would be too much. There's already enough of that out there that I did, even, right? Not even somebody else.
Yeah.
And at some point when I was really, I got into like Sylvian and blah 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 in '89 or something, like a long time ago. And like once you have discovered that music, like at some point you don't have, and I'm just using this word lightly, but you don't have any need anymore for beautiful or melancholic music, because there's already this absolute like perfect statement of music that kind of like actually fills that void, let's say. And then other musicians, other bands started kind of being inspired by that music, and somehow for some reason I couldn't listen to that music anymore. Like I was not interested in doing beautiful music, right? And so somehow I see that same thing, that same feedback cycle happen onto my own music and my own, and I really don't feel good about it, that I sometimes decide to not do the work, to not follow through. But I think just the last thing here, I think what you're saying is so inspirational to me, because you basically say, okay, I have this community here on Bandcamp where I can say, okay, it's only for the people that subscribe, and you just put it out there, and there's no need for you to even have these thoughts, right? You just do what you do, and if you think it's worthwhile, you put it out. And as you say, it takes 20 minutes to master, right? So and that's a similar situation I'm in, like.
And I think it allows you to, I mean, I think that's such an interesting observation, because it's such an important one. There's two or three things in there that I need to try and pull together, because I think that I do get to revisit the same space with my subscriber community in a way that I never could publicly. I couldn't make two works that was similar as some of the things that I've done recently, which are visiting the same space from slightly different angles. And that because I can present that to the subscribers and go, do you want to compare these? Do you have a favorite? Is there something in here that actually connects with you? You know, that you can't do that with a buying audience. You can't go, I need you to buy both of these albums because otherwise you're not going to get it. And they're going to go, no, fuck off. I just, stop telling me what to buy. You idiot. Like because what you're doing is you're making meaning through the fact that everybody's in through the door already. So they're there because they care. They're there because they're interested. They're curious about what you do, whatever their motivation is for giving you £30 a year. It's like, which is it's a tiny amount of money when you think about the volume of work that's involved. So that's, I sort of was, and that's the thing, you can consider and you think, well, okay, how cheap can I make this where the value of it is still apparent, but also I don't make it a thing for obsessives. I don't have because if I made it £100 a year, there's still a bunch of people that will pay it. But I would just be them, and it would just be this small handful of people who would get, in order to justify it in their own heads, would get even more obsessed with it. And I think that's a healthy thing. I don't think I deserve that. But
the way that I've solved that for me is that there are two tiers, like there's 50 and 80 or something that I do on Bandcamp, but I very specifically state, I have to check that again, but I think I do, that there's no difference. Like they don't get anything more.
Nice.
It's just their personal choice to kind of admit that they want to give more. So it's like it's a different psychological take on the you can pay more if you like.
I think that's genius, because I think often people are, and this is from feedback that I've had from listeners, people are really uncomfortable with being left to pay what they want, because I've had people say to me, I couldn't possibly afford to pay you what this is worth. If I had I've had a spare £100, I would give you it for this album. And it's like, well, that's really lovely. You don't need to. And they go, yeah, but you've left a space where that's what I'm meant to do. Like if you're asking me to express what I think this is worth, I can't afford to. So give me a price and tell me what I need to give you in order to make it justify this. And I think that, but because mine is left at 30 quid or more, it's like that is wide open. And actually, that's probably more problematic for people than what you're doing, where you've just gone, here's a higher tier. If that makes sense to you, feel free to just contribute at that level. And if at the end of the year you want to step down, that's cool as well. If your finances change, you're not going to lose out on a bunch of music because of it. I think that's really clever. I might have to consider that.
What's the fluctuation like in terms of subscribers?
So this is the other thing that I'm amazed at how few I lost to the pandemic. Like, I genuinely thought that it was going to decimate because of people's economics kind of crashing. But what I did a few times was I had a number of people who actually messaged me and said, I'm going to have to unsubscribe at least for a while because I've lost my job, because I've been furloughed, I haven't got any money, and now, gas bills and electric bills and all that kind of nonsense going through the roof. And what I've taken to doing is emailing people, particularly if they've been around for a while, and saying, you know what, subscribe, I'll refund it. I'd much rather you stayed in the community. And then at a point in the future when you can afford to, I'll stop refunding it. But actually, I'd just rather you were there. I don't want to make it like, it's not costing me anything for you to have this music. I can see exactly how much money they've given me. So if I want to make it about that, I can go, yeah, you've given me £150 over the last 5 years. Like that, when we start thinking about if there's a sort of Excel spreadsheet of fandom, somebody who's given me 150 quid is somebody who is committed to my work and cares about it on whatever level. Like in old money, those people were incredibly rare, and I have a lot of them now.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody's done that, I'm not going to suddenly say, no, you can fuck off. You're not getting any new music. Go and live in your hovel and turn your heating off. I'm going to go, no, for God's sake, if I can help you, you've been a meaningful part of this community for however long. And I just want to, I want to help you to continue to be a part of that if you want to be. If this is you apologizing because actually you've got less interest in the music than you thought you had, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to bail. If you're uncomfortable with this, you can go. I don't want to place any obligation on you, but if you want to stay, I'm more than happy just to refund the money once it ticks over. And
that's one of the little things that I'm still missing on Bandcamp is to even to that it would be great if I could gift memberships to people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a few people I would want to do that with. I mean, apart from anything else, it'd be nice to be able to do it for a couple of journalists. You know, or having said that, there are a number of journalists who subscribe to me on Bandcamp, and that feels almost like the ultimate generosity. Like when somebody who gets an endless amount of free music and has almost no time to consume the nonsense that I put out, chooses to actually give me £30 a year for a bunch of music that they would normally expect to get for free. I'm like, wow, that's extraordinary. That's a really, that's such a kind thing for somebody to do. But I would love to be able to, to gift them. I'd love to be able to kind of do like one-off discounts and go, okay, here's 50% off voucher for you because you're broke as shit. And I don't, I get that you want to support what I'm doing, but I also don't want to take money off you that you need to spend on your gas bill that's just 3 times as much as it was last month. So yeah, there's but yeah, so my way around that has just been to offer to refund it. But yeah, but there's been very few of those. I think I peaked around 300 subscribers, which was, it's the hilarious thing is 300 subscribers is the equivalent.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's the equivalent of almost 2.5 million streams a year on Bandcamp on Spotify. Like I'd have to be the world's biggest solo bass player. Like I'd have to be, Stu Ham or Victor Wooten or somebody is probably making that sort of stream level. Like I would have had to have had a record deal for 30 years and a bunch of coverage in the mainstream press to reach that. So to be able to make that kind of money off a community that cares and not have the bullshit that I would get from that many people listening to me on Spotify, because that's the thing is I don't want that audience. I don't want a bunch of people finding me on Spotify and then going, oh, you should be doing this. Why are you doing that? Why can't I get all your music on here? Why is it behind a paywall? Like, go away. I don't need your I get that you don't understand it. That's fine, but don't dump that on me. Instead, I've got this community that make it sustainable. And I think this is the thing is it viable? Is it sustainable? As the amount of time that I have to spend making that music pays for itself. I can't live off just the subscription. I think it would be a bit weird if I could. It would be nice, that would be a nice place to be. It'd be a nice problem to have. But alongside everything else, teaching and I still have, a significant number of individual album sales because there are people who I've spoken to who are just like, I can't deal with the volume of it. I don't need the subscription because I think I would feel like I ought to listen to it all. And I go, it's great. I'm more than happy for you to do whatever you want to do with it. And so, I put things out and people will just buy them and pay more than they need to for them and, kind of enjoy that. But the fluctuation, it's dropped to like 280 now, which is the lowest it's been in ages. So yeah, less than 10% fall off across the greatest economic crisis to hit Britain in since the war. It's like
for me it's samey. It's like 5% is the fluctuation.
And what I've also found is that almost everybody who unsubscribes, like 80% of the people who unsubscribe, resubscribe at a certain point. That people don't drift far from the community.
Yeah, I know. I was getting emails at the beginning of the pandemic where people canceled, right, the subscription, and some of them returned already.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
I've had quite a few like that, and it because I think again because it's a generous model. It's not a model that's about, it's not a grasping model. It's not about saying I'm trying to get as much money off you as I can. If you give me this, I'll give you this. It's not transactional in that way. I mean, it is a transaction because there's music at the end of it, but it's also an invitation to be a part of something bigger. And also, I think
that most people understand that they support, they support the artistic endeavor and of the artistic endeavor of that particular person, right? So it's not really about about product.
No.
Anymore.
No. It's funny. I do get people who apologize for not having, their subscribers who go, I'm not up to date with it. I haven't listened to the last 2 or 3, and I'm like, it's still there. It's yours. It's not going to go away. It's not like it's a limited Netflix release where it's there for 6 months and then I'm going to delete it. It's like it's not going anywhere. And
I think that you're very good with words, and like the little articles that you're writing on your website, they are mostly very, very good. And I would encourage people to go to your website to actually check those out, because like when Bandcamp was bought recently, you were one of the, like, your article was one of the best, I have to say. Very, very good. Um, like, because the way that your depth of insight is certainly not one sided, and I think that is just incredible. Uh, so that has been like 3 weeks now, 4 weeks or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I think we're sort of
Right.
out of the
So
mourning period now. Yeah.
did you notice that yesterday or the day before yesterday they started putting out these new? You had to agree again to the new rules and stuff. Have you
Oh,
seen that
I
already?
haven't. I haven't had that. I haven't had that. I had.
I've had that yesterday.
Oh, that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting to see. Yeah, change in terms of service. I mean, I imagine that's
Hmm.
that. I think they're probably going to have to do that just because corporate structure is different, and so and also
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
fact that there are going to be extra servers that now have access to your data that Epic are going to,
Hmm.
for obvious reasons, if they're actually embedding Bandcamp stuff across Epic's kind of games platforms, then they're going to need permission to do that. So I kind of
Yeah.
get that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sad. But I think it's sad because it represented a different way of doing things. Um, and I think on a functional, practical level, it will hope. I think their intention is for it to continue as it is. I think I think they're fundamentally good people behind it. I've seen a few people who've reacted incredibly badly towards, in terms of their assumptions about malicious intent from the people behind it,
Hmm.
assuming that they're
Hmm.
being greedy or whatever. And I know that they've had so many opportunities to be greedy before, and they
Hmm.
haven't.
Yeah.
That this is
Yeah.
There is a reason why they went for this and none of the other offers. That when Ethan wrote about, kind of having had other offers from within the music industries, in as much as I've had conversations with people at Bandcamp about that. I know they've had offers, and I know they've had attempts at people kind of getting hold of stuff, and they've always resisted. And there's a reason why they went for this, and I don't think it's just money. I think it's about them there being something that they can do on a scale that will make it possible. I think they have a number of problems that they've always had. One of which being that they can't sell things through the Apple the iPhone app because
Hmm.
if you did sell music in an iPhone app, then Apple take 30% of that. And instead of selling us down the
Hmm.
line and saying, well, okay, well, anything you sell on an Apple phone is 30% less because Apple are taking the money. Instead of doing that, they've taken a principled stand all the way along and said, no, we're not going to do that. So
Hmm.
they've always needed some kind of partner to start to challenge that. Epic have been one of the people who've been trying to take on Apple in a kind of antitrust lawsuit way. They've got billions more to spend on that kind of thing. So I think there are strategic aspects of this that make perfect sense.
Hmm.
But it is sad. It is, we loved our little corner of independent fluffiness in the that there's been a kind of, I saw a couple of takes that were about the suggestion that this happened because the the tiny amount of VC money that is in Bandcamp, that those VCs needed their payout. Again, I guess it's possible. I don't, I'm not party to their accounts. I don't work for them. Um, but my understanding is that the amount of VC money in Bandcamp was absolutely minuscule, and that if that was the only problem, they could have bought it out. They could have just,
Hmm.
that if that was the only thing they needed to do, they could have just bought out the extraneous stock. That's my assumption. Again, I can't. That didn't
I'm
strike me
trying.
as a reasonable one. Yeah,
I'm trying not to make any assumptions about
exactly,
the future. For me, it's just about like being descriptive about the current state of affairs,
exactly.
right? And that's really what is important. And like, I have to admit that about 2 years ago, I noticed a few changes that were happening under the hood, so to say,
Mm,
in Bandcamp, where I did hear some alarm in
right.
my head going off. And it was like small things, like for example, suddenly you couldn't put YouTube links into the description anymore.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, or that I had forgotten to make a track streamable on the album, and I released it, and the email didn't go out to the subscriber, to the people following me, and so you only ever notice these things when you're making a mistake, really, or when you're trying,
Yeah.
or I had a habit of posting, because I started doing these albums that were recorded online via Zoom. So I recorded the Zoom call, put that on YouTube, and so people could actually download the album and watch the creation of the album.
Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't possible anymore to put the YouTube link in, and then and so again, like I'm not judging, because I also understand why you want to kind of like keep people within the system.
I think also that they've yeah. I mean, I think part of that was that they were so there were a number of things that Bandcamp are dealing with all the time, and one of which is what happens at the fringes of Bandcamp, and so that there are there are no doubt a significant number of people who are constantly trying to upload copywritten content to Bandcamp. And it may well be that there's a way of that one of the things that spammers are doing is doing that and then trying to link out to affiliate links via whatever, and that it could be kind of got caught up in that. But it could just be that, as they've said about putting video, rather than when they started doing video hosting on their via pro accounts, that they said at the time that it was just like they didn't want adverts popping up on the screen. And the problem with using YouTube as an alternative to self-hosting was that you suddenly have within the Bandcamp experience the thing of clicking out to watch a video of a song, and suddenly you're bombarded with YouTube's adverts, and Google is suddenly making money off it. So I think there's part of that was about perhaps slightly heavy-handed attempt to steer the community towards things being more centralized around Bandcamp. The streaming thing's a bit odd. The email not going out. That's kind of that's an interesting one.
That was shocking. I was actually not happy about that.
Did you contact them? Did you email them?
No.
Because it sounds like it'd be worth having a chat with somebody about that. I mean, again, this is because I've got friends who work there. I tend to sort this stuff out via direct message, which is incredibly lazy of me, rather than actually emailing a support claim. And my friend Ben, who works there, is probably sick of me sending him DMs going, because especially with the PhD happening as well, I'm constantly saying, can you tell me what date this page was set up on? And he's like, he hasn't told me to piss off yet, but it would be perfectly reasonable for him to say, I'm not your personal research assistant. I actually have a job to do. Go away.
So what about Bandcamp Fridays then? What's your take on those?
Again, I've seen so many people start getting angry about it, and I think that the weird thing about it is that it was one of those absolute win-wins. That the very first one, I think Bandcamp were probably taken aback slightly by how successful it was, and suddenly they've got an entire day when they have their biggest number of support calls ever, and nobody's getting paid for doing them because they're not actually making any money. But Bandcamp's presence within the music ecosystem grew massively. Like as a result, I think Bandcamp did incredibly well out of it. The fact that they're now on whatever is it 200 million a year or something they're paying out to artists. It's an absolutely extraordinary kind of level of growth, and Bandcamp Fridays is a key part of that. So I think it was a thing that worked for them as a business. I don't think they weren't doing themselves any harm. Again, the analysis has always been people trying to find an ulterior motive. I think they genuinely wanted to just help us out. I think it was a fairly simple thing. They were like, well, we can do this. And again, the messaging is really obvious because Spotify can't do that. So there's a bit of a, to anybody else who isn't in a position to help that way. But it was genuine. I think it was great. I think that, again, there's been complaints from people saying, well, all of a sudden big bands and labels have started to put out special releases for Bandcamp Friday and it swamps it so the little artists can't do it. But again, we come back to this thing of my audience is closed. I'm not trying to get, there is no the audience beyond my audience. It's not like I need to suddenly, it's not like Gang of Four putting out vinyl is going to suddenly stop me from being able to connect with people who like what I do. It's not even like Steve Roach doing it would affect what I do. Like, it's like, the people who know what I do, I can reach them fairly easily. The bombardment with emails on every morning, every Friday morning, whenever they do it, is a bit of a pain. But you just delete them all, and or bookmark them and come back to them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think it's just a really good thing. I think all good things get ruined beyond scale, and I think we're coming back to the thing about the scale of a community. That all of Bandcamp's problems, as well as all of its possibilities, come from scale.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what we don't like, the bit that jars with you and I, is that in order to function at the scale that they now exist at, there are changes that need to happen. And to continue to do that without it getting clunky and creaky, they needed a level of investment in the infrastructure to make that possible. And their decision was to go to Epic rather than to do it any other way. And I think that's a bit weird, but I don't think there was any kind of Machiavellian strategy thing behind Bandcamp Fridays. I think it was just an attempt to help. Should it stop? I don't know. I still see artists every time they do it paying their bills. I still see people saying, "Thanks, I've been able to do this." On a Friday, if I put out a new album on a Bandcamp Friday, I will normally get 5 or 6 new subscribers and maybe make anywhere up to about £200 in direct sales if I put out a new album on that day. It's not
That's
good.
wonderful.
It's amazing, and it's like, great.
Yeah.
Well, that's my rent paid off a single day's sales and returns. And
I think it very much depends on how people have been using Bandcamp before. So I think for some artists, for some people, for some communication styles, or for somebody like you who has already built up a following of subscribers, it could only help. I think it did help. Also, I think for people who have not been using Bandcamp very much, it was a motivator to get them to actually start using it, and it was good for them. I think that there is like a certain, and I have to say, unfortunately, I'm part of that group where I had a constant stream of income via Bandcamp, and there was no competition. At least not the competition that you could feel, right? So, and what it has turned into is, okay, everybody look at me on that Friday, right? And buy my new album or buy my music. And that has been a little bit frustrating, I have to admit. And I think it's just like this general, and this is something that we've been talking about for over an hour now, like this competitive model, that's old, right? That's kind of old for us. We don't really want that in our lives, and that's why I used to wonder, I don't wonder that anymore, if the buyout, let's say, was the result of Bandcamp allowing competitive structures, right? So that's kind of just, I just want to say that. I don't know if it's true, but
I think that there's an interesting thing about there's a couple of interesting cultural things about Bandcamp and the way that it has worked. One of which is how slowly they introduce new things. That they don't chuck out a bunch. It's not like they're kind of constantly iterating and putting out new ideas and beta versions of this and that, and then we've constantly got a bleeding edge of stuff that doesn't quite work that's being fixed. They don't do that. They wait 2 years and suddenly there's a new thing. There'll be fan accounts. There'll be subscription things, which I got to use for a year before anybody else. There were 3 of us who got a year before they launched it. So they did trial it, but they trialed it with 3 artists, and I consulted with them on how I wanted it to work. I'd spent the previous couple of Januaries talking to Ethan about that in California, which was great. But they did that, and then they did the same with vinyl, and they have these big launches when they put infrastructure in place. So I think that when they start trying to scale those things up, they trial these things, but they trial them in a finished form. And it's not about will this work. It's just whether or not it's going to be economically viable beyond the fact that it works. But I think that Bandcamp has an affordance, back to that concept, for a number of different kinds of economic transaction. So the fact that you can have all of your work, pay what you want, and just, it's basically you're acknowledging that your audience, the economic disparity between the various members of your audience is such that any price point is going to be meaningless. So you've gone, well, I've got a bunch of kids who like it, they can download it for free. I've got a bunch of adults who like it, who understand that the shit needs to be paid for. They're going to give me some money, so I can do that. Then there's the people who charge £7, £8, £9, £10 an album, who are basically treating it like downloadable CDs. It's not a model that really makes much sense to me. Much sense to me, largely because of the way I engage with Bandcamp, which is that anything under £5, I'll buy without even thinking about it. If somebody sends me a link to a thing that looks interesting, I'll buy it. If it's under a £5, it's like, yeah, I'll have that, and I'll listen to it later. I don't listen to things first. If somebody's charging £7, £8, £9, £10 for it, I'm going to listen to it, and if I don't love it, I'm like, it's quite a lot of money, and it's just weirdly psychological. So I tell again, I don't think it's a moral, it's not an ethical split. It's a functional one for me. And then there's the affordance of the subscription platform, where suddenly it's like, actually, I can just use this infrastructure to create and manifest community, and I can charge whatever I want to be in that. I can include whatever I want within that. There are certain things about it that frustrate me. I wish that I could index all the video that I've uploaded. I wish that was searchable. I'm really glad they've now put in post-specific links, because for the longest time there wasn't any way of linking to a particular post. So now I can, if I want to link to a video, if I want to go, 3 years ago I released this, I can do the work of scrolling back through God knows how many pages of the subscriber feed and go, okay, here's the video, and I don't have to upload it again. I can just relink to it. So that's a good thing. But I wish there was a better way of presenting that. I wish there was like a carousel of video that people could kind of flick through. But I think that they were thinking of it as like people talking to camera, almost like a video podcast approach, which is also kind of borne out by the fact that you can't upload audio as a kind of attachment within a message like that. No, it's like if you're doing audio, that's a record. So there are these really interesting cultural assumptions that Bandcamp have made, and there's always been a desire to funnel people towards what they see as the optimum use case. It's not an open platform in that way at all, but it's not for very good reason. The reason it isn't is that there's a kind of a quite a solid ideology behind that, which is what we want to do is give people a space in which these things work, and that other people's weird usage of it doesn't break it. But sorry, carry on.
No, I think that the big advantage of Bandcamp is that it is using technology that, at least on the surface, looks like something that only nerds would use, and nerds that actually love music, right? So it's sort of like a pre-selection of users that actually will spend money. So it makes a whole lot of sense the way that they've been running it and the way that it looks, and as you say, at the pace with which they roll out new things. I think it's genius.
Yeah.
And I really wish they kind of like keep that attitude, right? Because if they turn it into something that is like, okay, you buy music just with one click, let's say, right? It will deteriorate into something where like there's no more direction, let's say.
Well, they've already talked about this in terms of one of the things that Ethan has always described when he's talking about Bandcamp is that it's about high friction interaction. It's difficult to get stuff. That paying for stuff is difficult, so it requires a level of commitment. And what you do is you get people used to making that commitment about things they care about. So the difficulty is that you're absolutely right. It's built into the interface, and it's there for a reason. And if they had a Bandcamp currency where you put 50 quid on it a month, then you just click and download whatever it is within that, it would change the degree of thought that goes into it, and people would engage with the music differently. You'd end up with people buying a bunch of shit they don't need, like we used to. I don't know if you ever had an eMusic account. Did you ever use eMusic? So eMusic was that, where I would pay £15 a month, I think it was, or £11 a month, and I would get, because as it kept going up, I kept staying at the same point, so I would get £22 a month worth of downloads for £11, and I would just go through and I would, and the crazy thing about that was I would always choose ECM albums because they had the lowest number of tracks on them. So I'd be like, okay, I can buy this Terrier Ripdale album, which is 3 songs, and it's effectively only costing me 70p,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
by far the cheapest way to get ECM stuff. And I think if Bandcamp turned into e-music like that, you would have far less meaningful interaction around the music. What you would have is people accumulating music in ways that was meaningless. And I think that when they introduced the fan accounts, I think there was an awful lot that went into what are these for? This is about displaying your record collection, not dick waving fandom. Like, look at me, I'm the biggest fan. It's like, no, here's all of my music. So you basically can send somebody a link and they can scroll through everything you've got. You can't filter it. You can't feature certain things. It's not like saying, look at me, I'm the world's biggest Marcus Reuter fan. It's about saying, here's my collection. And if you scroll through that and you like Marcus's stuff jumps out, you can listen to it. But you're basically flicking through the vinyl in my living room. And I really liked the way they did that. They did that with very, very acute understanding of how fandom functions as a discovery tool. And I find it really interesting how I know quite a few artists who are currently arguing that the amount they pay to Bandcamp doesn't make sense for them, because they're like, well, Bandcamp are taking 10%, but all I'm getting is, they're just managing downloads for me. I can do that myself. And if that is their experience, that they're actually getting no internal traffic off Bandcamp, then it makes perfect sense for them to go and build their own thing. But for me, I'm constantly aware that I get more back from Bandcamp than I give them. That apart from the obvious kind of delivery mechanism stuff, that actually maintaining that and maintaining that many formats, that's going to be tough. Like I wouldn't want to have space on my server to host ogg vorbis files in case some nerd wanted to download, .ogg format audio. Like that's nuts. I want someone else to deal with that. But also that thing of bringing someone's collection together in an app and the cross-pollination from that, the way that I find that subscribers arrive because they've seen one of my albums being sold on the front page, clicked on it and gone, oh, that's nice artwork. What's that? Oh, I like him. And people who have got a reasonable amount of money just go, oh, wait, 30 quid a year, I'll get everything. Well, I'll do that. I'll listen to him later. That I get a number of people who do that or find me through someone else's collection. But what I find is the thing that acts as the kind of the hub of all of that isn't my main Bandcamp page, it's my Bandcamp fan page. Because what I decided to do, I don't know if I described it as a strategy or if it just was a consequence of how I behave anyway. But since sort of, I don't know, the mid 2000s, I've been trying to model what good music fandom looks like online, rather than telling people come and buy my stuff. It's like, this is what I do to the music that I like. If I like something that somebody does, I'm going to talk about it. There have been years, certainly before the subscription has kind of changed this balance. But back when I used to put out 1 or 2 albums a year, there would be huge chunks of the year when I was making more money for other people than I was for myself, because I didn't have anything of my own to talk about. So I'd go and listen to this record, have a listen to this. Guys, check this out. And it would always be Bandcamp links, because that would mean that people would actually sell things and they would get, that was better than sending YouTube links or whatever. So I would use Bandcamp as a discovery platform. I would go, this is how I find and share music. You can do the same. So that anybody who came through me, bought my music, would then have a model for what to do with it. And it wasn't as cynical as that. It wasn't, if I do this, I'll make more money. But it was definitely, people need to see what this platform makes possible. And people need to see that it made much more sense to me to be part of a community of people who love music and use that platform to expand that space, rather than for me to be the person sat behind it all going, I'm just making music and you need to give me money for it. And if you don't, you're a dickhead. Like, I just, I just wanted people to join me on a journey rather than to sit on the opposite side of a table and negotiate with me over what it was worth.
Yeah, just on a much broader level, think back to 2002, 2005, when the idea of digital distribution that has been, I can't remember the name of it now, but there was something that Peter Gabriel started in around
Seven
2005 that I
Digital.
was, yes, probably. and I remember receiving the like a printed brochure something about it, and but at the same time, like, this narrative that music or the music business is dead, that you can't really make money off of music, like Bandcamp really turned that around in a really amazing fashion. And that's why, like, even though I may be critical about a few features, let's say, I think it's been really like a success story that is kind of unbelievable,
I,
right?
I
Like it has really turned a trend around.
I genuinely can't imagine what I'd be doing right now if it didn't exist. I genuinely don't know, because
Hmm.
I would probably
Hmm.
still have a really crap hand rolled download store on my own website, because I had a store before Bandcamp. I was self hosting
Hmm.
download sales, and
Hmm.
they were 128K MP3s because I was an idiot and didn't know what I was doing. And I would have obviously at some point discovered FLAC and discovered this, and I would have had numerous times when I went over the download limit for my server, and I would have been experimenting with that. But I don't. I think back to the thing about Bandcamp being quite controlling in terms of how you use it. It's taught me how to do a lot of things, as well as me being able to. I mean, obviously, I've had input into how Bandcamp works. So by meeting, so from I don't know, 2011 probably to about 2015, I would meet with Ethan every January. I'd be out there in America for NAMM. I would go up to California and we'd just have lunch. And we'd have lunch and he'd say, "What do you want it to do?" And he'd sit there with a notebook and write down what I've said. And so there would be
Hmm.
times when things that I'd mentioned would crop up in Bandcamp afterwards. And obviously, the subscription, I had a fair amount to say about that. And I don't know how much of what I said was just in synergy with what they were planning anyway, and how many of those bits actually became part of it. But certainly some of it is things that I came up with. Um, so, but without outside of all that, it it just changed the way I act as a fan. Like I suddenly had this. I re-buy albums that I already own because I can't be bothered to open iTunes. I'd rather listen to it on Bandcamp. So I'll go and buy them again on Bandcamp. And you go, okay, what other format does that? That's what I used to do with tapes and CD. Like nobody does that with digital. Why would you do that? I end up doing it with Bandcamp because the option is there, and particularly if it's cheap. Like I wish that Tom Waits' entire catalog was only £5 on Bandcamp rather than 10, because I'd just go and replace it all because it's I'd love to have it in the Bandcamp app. That's how I do a lot of my listening. But it's all super expensive. Same with Peter Gabriel. But I love that Peter's stuff is there. I love that he's got the rights to it, and so can upload it all. But it would be great if he realised that charging £4 for it meant that we'd all go and rebuy it rather than charging £10 for it and pretending it's a CD. I think that for someone like him, that would be such a great opportunity to redraw the boundaries around how we view that. Because I would happily go and drop 40, 60 quid on the entire Peter Gabriel back catalogue, but I haven't got £120 to do that. It's a bit different.
Yeah, that's really a really difficult question. And I have kind of like started to try to offer less music for free.
Yeah,
So, um, but it turns out like that the most successful model still is just to put it up for free
yeah, yeah.
in
I,
a way.
I love the way that you've managed to you've maintained that. And because the reason I stopped doing pay what you want was mainly so that I could have a single price download of everything. That the kind of where you sort of get this entire digital collection. That what I wanted there to be a delineation between the subscription, the one click of everything, but you're not obliged to anything else. It's just kind of you just get all the music, and then album pricing. And so I just went, okay, arbitrarily £2 an album is what it's going to be right across the site. But like you say about the kind of writing on the blog, all of this exists within a discursive framework that I don't assume I'm talking to 10,000 people at a time. I get really
Mm.
confused when people kind of, because there is enough of my stuff on YouTube and on other sites, I forget that I have an extended audience of probably, I don't know, 100,000 people somewhere out there. There's there's a video of mine on Base the World that's been watched 140,000 times. So assuming a bunch of those people have watched it twice, let's call it 100,000 people. And a bunch of other stuff that's been watched 30, 40,000 times on YouTube. And I've been featured in magazines. I was on the cover of. I can see up there. See, this is there's my out. There's my one moment
Yeah.
of mainstream media success. Bass Guitar Magazine. It's there because it's never going to happen again. Um, But, you know, so I've had that kind of exposure, but I'm always confused by that audience because I'm not aware of them most of the time. So when something happens and they suddenly stumble into my orbit again and start asking stupid questions and making weird comments, I'm like, God, I've forgotten you people exist. It's like being underground and you suddenly stick your head up and go, oh God, no, not again. Because I'm in this amazing space where I have this informed, caring, smart community of people who tell me, who help me to understand what it is that I do. I'm weirded out by kind of people beyond that wall, you know, which is, and yet I need to connect with them because that's where the people are that are going to come in.
You know, I think that there's also something that we have that we're not always taking into account, which is the fact of like we are here and we're like around 50 years old, right? So what is going to happen in the next 10, 20 years? And I think if you're looking at the careers of um, other musicians, you see that there's basically like there are many different stories, but like there's like the possibility to grow, and there's the possibility to do the other the other way. So since you and I, what we've been doing, the trajectory is up. It has always been going up, right? So 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 I feel quite confident that we'll get surprised. You know, there are some surprises in store for us.
But it's also because
when it comes to
but we both look so young. That's the other thing that we both have going for us, is that we might be nearly 50, but we both look like we're basically 30. You know, look at us. We're basically kids. Especially you with your actual hair. Mine's kind of, you know, disappearing. But no, I think that's great. Although I maybe I should throw this one at you and see what you make of this. I nicked this off a friend of mine called Andrew Dubber, who said this to me about 10 years ago, and he said that his way of viewing aging, he said I've decided, he said this when he was in his early 40s, he said, I've decided that my life's work will happen between the ages of 50 and 60 and everything else is practice. And I was suddenly super liberated by that, like to go, yeah, I'm going to do that. And like you, I'm 50 at the end of this year. Right at the point, 2 months before my 50th birthday, I'll be handing in my PhD. So I will have probably done my Viva either just before or just after my 50th birthday. So I'm hopefully, assuming I don't completely cock it up, I will be entering my 50th year as Dr. Steve with this kind of decade ahead of me to take that and everything that the temple of accumulated error that I've built up around me, that is, you know, everything I've learned up to this point, and then go, okay, what is this? The open vista of my 50s is going to be, you know, I'm really looking forward to it. Partly because I will have had 7 years of this part-time PhD, and I'm bloody sick of it.
I remember you telling me about it even 20 years ago. Come on. just kidding.
No. Well, no. I started. I mean, the idea came about 12 years ago. You know, I did a talk at Leeds Beckett, and then I did a research project at Imperial College and nearly turned that into a PhD. So there were a couple of things about 12 years ago which we maybe talked about. And then 7 years ago I actually started it, and so it should have been 6 years part time. I've had a year extension because of COVID. But I just need to get it out of the way. But that does mean I'm going to be entering my 50th year with that, and all of that brings with it in terms of the possibility to go places and do things. And, you know, it's kind of,
so you asked about my perspective.
Yeah. What do you think of that
thing? So around 15 or 20 years ago, when I started to look into using you know, somebody doing PR for me, let's say, like where I was researching who could be working for me, and obviously I was looking at more like the people that were promoting experimental music. And it was that time when I started to think, okay, let me look at the artists that these people are actually promoting. And it turned out, like I suddenly had this insight. Oh man, these artists, they're at least in their 40s.
Yeah.
And I was in my early 30s, right? And I realized, that means something.
Yeah.
That means something.
Yeah.
So maybe the people that have success in young, when they are young, they must be the exception. Those
Yeah,
people are the exceptions. And all the other people that have success, they need to put in the work, they need to put in the years until something happens. And that was kind of like a revelation, but it was also, it was a relief, because I realized, okay, so maybe me trying to force anything on people here
yeah,
is too early. Maybe I
yeah.
need to have the gray beard before people will actually see me as a valuable voice. That's
I think that's really. I think that's really. I think there was a degree to which you become embedded in a culture over time, and you become a presence. But I think there's also a point at which there is an entry point into your current work is nostalgia for your older work, and that obviously takes an amount of time. And there are people who, occasionally I'll get an email from somebody, and it'll be or a Twitter message, and it'll be them holding up my first album or my second album, going, "Listen to this, I still love it." And my response is to go, "Really? Like, given that everything else is out there, okay, that's cool." But then I think about my own listening and kind of go, yeah, there are records from 20, 30, 40 years ago that still mean so much to me. And then I realized that I'm that for them. That record is for them is close to the edge to me. Or, or Walk Across the Rooftops or Secrets of the Beehive or whatever it is that is that record that carries that meaning. And so I suddenly feel that immense privilege, but also the fact that accumulated over time, there is this kind of piling up of people who have this historical relationship with what you do. And the thing that tips them over into reinvestigating what you do is about those kind of, when you breach certain walls, you get, I think, I'd be interested to know what joining the Stickmen did for you in that way, whether or not suddenly people who knew about you all along suddenly went, oh, now it's okay to like Marcus because he's playing with these legends.
I don't really know what the perspective from the outside is, really, but I can tell you it has really just I really think what the main difference is for me is that it gave me an opportunity to interact directly on a social level with
Exactly what you
people.
were saying at the beginning, which I think is lovely.
And
Yeah.
yes, and that is exactly what was happening, because, like, I don't know, like, at some point I had this idea, okay, so maybe what people actually see in me, or how they see me, is entirely uh, tinted by the way the music sounds,
Yes.
right? So maybe the music and some people did say that is cold. For some people it's
Right.
cold music. I know what they mean. It's like the use of certain scales, let's say, which doesn't sound warm to them, right? So, and yeah, I know I use those scales, and I have certain production values that I like. I like
Yeah.
things to be like maybe cold, or like I like shiny chrome surfaces, right, in my music,
Yeah.
right? And some people, and so that's kind of like, and then I realized, okay, maybe that's how people see me.
That's so
And I
interesting.
have learned, and I've learned that kind of like, the hard way, but also the very good way, that when people meet me, they are shocked.
Right.
Wow, this is Marcus. Like, he's funny. He's actually funny. And he shakes my hand, and his hand is warm, right? And
Yeah. Because and that's so interesting, because I think there are so many similarities between you and I think, and I think that's one of them, is
Mhm,
that both of us are, in a sense, we're built for the kind of the environment that we're working in that we are
mhm,
fairly gregarious, friendly, talkative, literate
mhm,
people who can write, who can talk, who aren't crippled with self-doubt about our work. That we're not, it doesn't come from a place where we're heroin addicts and our music is our way of kind of trying to deal with that. We're not, we don't have that burden. We make music
mhm.
as a reflection of how we see the world. But behind that is this kind of nice person that, exactly like you say, when you meet them at a gig, people want to connect with that. And I feel for people who are a lot shyer than that. I mean, I'm always interested in how people manage that. I mean, Tony would be an example of somebody who's not, I don't think he's crippled, but he's certainly not, he doesn't have that desire to kind of be as
That
out.
has changed. That has changed,
Has he
actually.
got more? He's got more
I,
outgoing like that.
y- yeah. I mean, Tony has really had a huge learning curve there
Yeah.
with the camp that
Of
we're doing
course.
every year.
Yeah.
And so the camp really opened up and really changed his perspective on fans.
That's really
Like
interesting,
he
because he's always been I first met him. I interviewed him and Trey in '99 for Bassist magazine, and I was in my late 20s and wasn't doing the kind of, it was Project One gig at the Jazz Cafe, and I interviewed him before that.
I was there.
Oh, you were? Yeah, yeah. It was an extraordinary thing, and we were sat in this basement of some hotel in Notting Hill doing this interview. And for me, like, obviously Tony, both of them were like these kind of legendary figures, but there was a kind of warmth and a camaraderie, and I met Tony multiple times over the years, but it was always interesting to see him, how he would respond to me when I was the person he knew best. Like, when I remember doing a masterclass and I showed up, and I think of all the people there, like, we weren't, not like we were close friends, but he knew me best. And so he then used me as a kind of filter through which to connect with people. So there was always that desire to connect. I don't think he's ever been anywhere close to misanthropic. It's just, there was just a kind of shyness. And I guess it's that uncertainty that comes with having a legendary thing around you like that. It must be really weird, because I've never had it, because I can go through life assuming that the people I meet don't know who I am. I remember seeing this. We were talking about Jonas before. I remember seeing this with Jonas at NAMM, and I remember walking through NAMM with him, and people would walk up to us with that kind of, "I'm about to talk to you" face. And I suddenly realized that for Jonas, he never knew whether the person was going to say, "Your music has changed my life," or, "Excuse me, mate, do you know where the toilets are?" That it could be either of those. And so physically, you respond differently depending on how you do that. And if you're Jonas or if you're Tony, then unless there's something in the way, merch table, or for Tony at NAMM, it would be being on the Ernie Ball stand holding a Music Man, and suddenly there's this kind of transactional device between you and him, which gives him a safe space. Otherwise, he has no idea. So the person coming up knows exactly what they want from the encounter, but he doesn't. And it took me a long time to understand what people in that position were dealing with, and basically how lucky I am to have the level of anonymity I have. Because if people do recognize me, and it does happen occasionally, my first thought is, or it used to be when I had long hair, it was like, do they think I'm Geddy Lee? Is this person recognize me because they actually think I'm in Rush? There was a guy came up to me at an American airport once and said, "I love your music," and I was like, "Shit, is he a Rush fan who doesn't know how short Geddy is, or is he a fan of me?" And he was, I think it was me. I think it really was me. But like, I had this conversation with this guy about how much he liked my music, but he didn't mention the album title. So I was going to say, is he going to say Grace Under Pressure, or is he going to say Grace and Gratitude? I don't know which of these he's going to mention. Like, it was, but like, it's always a surprise. So I can carry myself as though people don't know who I am, and it's not a weird thing. But if you're Jonas or Tony, it is a real kind of.
In the case of Tony, certainly, it's what we discussed before. It's that middleman that was working for him or with him before. So things were very different then. And for people who have been part of that system for 30, 40 years, to kind of like make that switch takes some time, right? And I think Tony has managed to really open up quite a bit.
Oh, I'm really pleased,
and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Because
hey, Steve, I do have to go, and I think like this was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I think we should do a volume 2, because I actually want to talk about music and
we haven't actually talked about music making at all, which is I think it does leave a kind of really nice volume 2. Marcus, I'm up to talk to you every day, all the days. This has been lovely. And I've hugely enjoyed it. No, it's I think it's that I had this. I interviewed Zoe Keating, as I mentioned earlier on, for the PhD, and she and I were chatting, and all the way through she's going, "I can tell you this because you understand." And she was just like that sudden recognition of being understood, that you're talking a language that often when I talk to journalists, particularly if they're bass journalists, their assumptions about what a bass player does and what we want out of music are so far from what it is that I actually care about, that you kind of want to go, it's not I think what you want is bad. It's just I don't care about it. Like, it's not my thing. Can we talk about the thing that actually matters? And they have no idea what it is. So talking to you, where there's this absolute synergy in terms of what it is that we're trying to do and what it all means, it's just lovely. Thank you. Thank you for indulging it. But yeah,
You're
let's
welcome.
do a
Yeah.
part two. I'm definitely up for that.
Okay, bye for now.
See you soon.
Thank you.